Welcome to Evil Done Badly, the worst true crime podcast on the internet. I must apologize for my voice and my appearance a bit here today. I'm a little jet-lagged and I'm in need of a few carbonated beverages. You see, the Evil Done Badly World Tour just ended, and, well, I'm a bit spent. I mean, we didn't sell any tickets, and I didn't actually go anywhere, but it was still very stressful. I mean, being ignored by the complete population of the Earth is exhausting. Not to mention it cost me like $12 in TikTok advertising to promote it. Yeah, normal people would be discouraged after all that, but not me. I thrive on your disregard. So, if you're still here and not ignoring me like the rest of the planet, I hope you're up for an old-timey story with a bunch of old-timey murders. It's from the 1800s, so as we like to say here, that's fucking forever ago, and facts are flexible. So the events described herein are probably not all that accurate. Not that any of the facts we usually present on this show are ever guaranteed to be factual, but in cases like this, it's even less so. It's not like everything was caught on cell phone back then like it is now. I mean, you can't pull down your pants and take a shit in an alley without someone slapping it up on YouTube these days. So, anyways, on this episode, we're talking about the Bender family. With a name like that, I get the feeling they used to drink a lot. And I totally get that. And these guys would probably be a cool hang if they weren't such total cunts. But before we get into it, grab a beverage, hold on to your heavenly arse, and let's hear the theme song. This episode of Evil Done Badly is brought to you by the wide world of paranormal investigations and ridiculous thrifter groups on Facebook. They are both getting huge, and will probably be going on their own world tour soon. So check them out when you're done listening to this slightly informative, terrible, inaccurate episode of this lousy podcast. Now back to the show. Let's just start off this episode by saying I love spooky hotel stories. Have you ever seen 1408? It's great. It's a Weinstein movie, but don't let that distract you. This is sort of a spooky hotel story. It's not very paranormal. It's a little bit more realistic, but it's still very spooky. The Bender family, consisting of John, Elvira, daughter, Kate, and son or son-in-law John, were living in Labette County, Kansas in 1870. Just to illustrate how odd their living arrangement is or was, just listen to this. Little John's last name is actually Gebhardt, which is not Bender. His name is not Bender, and yet he still might be the son of John Bender. Or maybe he's just married to Kate. The locals at the time were under the impression that they were actual siblings, but they noticed that they seemed to be really friendly with each other. So, whatever. Collectively, we will be referring to these weirdos as the Bender family, whether they share any DNA or not. They were probably German immigrants. They owned some land, they had a large cabin, a barn, and a well. They split up the cabin into a storefront, living quarters, and had space for people to lodge for the night and grab a bite to eat and a nice beverage. The older Benders were not as adept at English as the two kids. The sign on the store read, "Grow Cry." You know what? As funny as that sounds, it's really only missing one E from the word grocery. And there's plenty of English people who can't spell grocery either, so I'm not going to be too hard on them. Anyways, these people were probably of German descent, but no one knows for sure. Let's just call these cunts European. So, we don't even know their real names, but we're just going to run with it. So, what we've got here are four people living together who call themselves the Benders. The parents were widely considered ugly and were called hideous and hag-like by those who knew them. They were a couple of cantankerous old fuckers, and they kept to themselves. The kids were not as fuck ugly and actually went to Sunday school. They were also most likely banging each other because, well, they were probably married, but that's not really relevant to the case here. I'm sure the whole fucking family is probably screwing each other. Fuck ugly or not. Whatever. Kate, now she was the talented one. She would have seances and give lectures on spiritualism and free love, and it would attract the crowd to the inn. You know what? If Sunday school taught you about free love and spiritualism and have seances and stuff, you get a way better turnout. Bible school for horny pagans? Yep, that could totally work. So the Benders, they have their little bed and breakfast going, and they cater to all sorts of travelers along the perilous landscape. In 1871, this area was known as a sketchy neighborhood and full of unsavory thieves and villains. So it wasn't unusual for the odd traveler to get in a scuffle, maybe even disappear and or die. A Mr. Jones was one of these such people. He would be unable to hand anybody a bottle because he had his throat cut and his head smashed. Nobody was ever charged with this crime, and it kind of blew over. At least until February of 1872, when 2 more bodies surfaced with pretty much the same injuries. Okay, we're establishing a bit of a trend here. And it's a bad trend, and you have some angry townspeople, and you have some vigilante groups springing up. They start hunting down the people they think are responsible for it, and they round up some of these alleged evildoers, only to have the police say, you can't just arrest people you think are evildoers, because we need evidence. And the angry mobs neglected to gather up any evidence pertaining to the murders. Now, just because the authorities told them where to go and said, okay, these evildoers, they can go free, it didn't stop the mobs from running some of them out of town with their pitchforks. So they're still angry. Now, this area gathers such an ominous reputation that people start taking the long way around the mountain to get wherever they're going and avoiding the place altogether. One person who didn't avoid the area was George Loncourt in the winter of 1872. He was traveling across the country with his infant daughter and was never heard from again. So his friend back home is named Dr. York. And in the spring of 1873, he's sitting home and he's just wondering, hey, why has my pal George not written to me since he went on his little adventure to Iowa? So Dr. York heads off in search of his friends and questions a bunch of homesteaders concerning the whereabouts of Mr. Loncourt and his daughter. Dr. York gets no results from these yokels, gets annoyed, takes his ball, and goes home. He heads back on his way with no answers, and wouldn't you know it, he goes missing himself somewhere between Iowa and Kansas. Now the thing is, Dr. York's disappearance is not going to go unnoticed. His 2 brothers, Alex and Ed, they grow concerned when he doesn't come back on time. They freak out a bit. They gather up an angry mob of their own, head back out on the road, and try and track him down. Now, this angry mob winds up at the Benders' house in March. And the Benders say, yup, we've seen Dr. York. And they said, we don't know what happened to him. Maybe those pesky Indians out there, they have done something to him. Maybe they tied him to a cactus and let the buzzards peck his eyeballs out. I mean, you know, you don't know what these Indians are capable of. And he goes, okay. They also invite Alex to stay for some woodchuck and rutabaga stew. And he admits, yeah, it's possible that the Indians had something to do with my friend's disappearance. I mean, the Indians sure like tying people to cactuses, and yeah, that's quite possible. And he also admitted that he was famished and would love some woodchuck stew. So he stays for dinner, bids the Benders farewell, and heads back outside to hassle the townspeople. So Alex, he's out pounding the pavement looking for leads when he hears that a woman has run away screaming from the Benders Inn. And she was threatened with knives, and he's just like, holy shit, I was just over there. So he heads back over there and asks, what the fuck is going on? Why is this woman screaming? The younger Benders answer the door and they deny anything ever happened. But the mom, Elvira, who supposedly doesn't understand English, overhears the conversation, which is in English, and goes off her head and tells them to leave, gets out. Now, she explains that she threatened the woman. She had a good reason to threaten the woman. Because she was a witch who had put a hex on their family. So the only logical thing to do was chase her away with pointy objects. Now, Elvira proves that she's more than a little unhinged and at least a little bit more bilingual than she was letting on. The angry mob is convinced that the Benders had something to do with the disappearances, and they're ready to hang these fuckers. Alex tells them that there will be time for hangings after they round up some actual evidence. God damn it. It's hard to be a good angry mob when everyone is so hung up on doing stuff by the book and getting all this evidence crap. I mean, it'd be easier to just fry them all and just plant some evidence later if it makes you feel better. Jeez. So anyway, the locals, they've all got their panties in a bunch, and they hold a town meeting to discuss the missing folks and blame it all on the Indians. The Yorks and the Benders, well, at least the Johns, they all attend this meeting, and it is decided that every homestead from Hicktown to Redneck City is going to be searched, and they're going to track someone down, and they're going to hold somebody responsible for this. Now, the only reason they're deciding to search everybody's house is not to arouse the Benders' suspicions, because they don't want the Benders knowing they're being targeted as the alleged murderous weirdos with the Airbnb. Now, they all agreed that there would be warrants granted to make the searches of everyone's house legal. Christ! They're getting warrants, and they're doing all this stuff by the letter. Fuck, it's hard to be an angry mob when you gotta worry about warrants and evidence and all that crap. That's a lot of red tape for a bunch of crazy people with torches. Anyways, moving on, the whole idea of not scaring the Benders away by pretending they're going to search everybody works exactly as planned by scaring the Benders away later that night. Now, a few days will pass, and they're still kind of searching around the town, and then somebody notices a flock of hungry cows lingering around the Benders' place. That's a little odd. The mob comes by, and they discover that, well, the Benders' house, it's been vacated. And it's been vacated for at least a few days now. Now, the Benders had packed up everything, personal items, clothing, whatever, food, you name it, except for their cows. And then they ran away. Now, given the circumstances, that's a little suspicious. And what's even more suspicious is the ungodly stench permeating the farmhouse. The angry horde and their noses sniff around the house, and they trace the odor to a trap door in the floor, and it's been nailed shut. They bust into the hole and find about a barrel of old blood. Not a literal barrel, just, big ton of red liquid. And they find it seeped into the soil. And they figure there's good chance that there's bodies somewhere on this premises. And they pick up the house, and they move it over. And they dig up the ground where it used to be. I hope they got a warrant for picking up that house and moving it. Now, this is one determined angry mob. Now, more specifically, it's one determined strong angry mob. They dig, and they don't find anything. So after moving the house, lifting it all up, they come up empty. And then one of them gets a bright idea to take a stick and poke at the ground in hopes of striking something suspicious. And they start with the vegetable garden. I wouldn't trust a vegetable. And it had appeared that it had been recently disturbed. And boom! They find Dr. York's body in the radishes, covered by only a couple inches of dirt. They continued poking around and unearthed 9 different grave sites. Now, I'd be a little fucking annoyed if I lifted a whole house looking for bodies and didn't find anything. And somebody with a twig walks along and just, swishes the dirt around and, hey, look, there's a body. Anyway, on day 2 of the search, 8 bodies are recovered from the gravesite, and another one is found in the well. All but one had been mutilated. They had their throats cut and their heads smashed with hammers. See, these guys are cunts. They should have let the mob have their way with them when they had the chance. So how did the murders go down? Well, the theory is that the Benders would invite their guests to sit at the head of the table in front of a curtain at mealtime. The ladies, fuck ugly as they were, would distract the victim, and then one of the men would pop out from behind the curtain and bonk him on the head with a hammer. While they're dazed and they're wondering what the fuck just happened, the women would pounce on them and cut their throats. The victim would die on the floor, the trapdoor would be opened, and they would be plopped into the hole. The very Sweeney Todd sort of situation. And it also appears that if someone got whacked on the head and they're kind of like disoriented and stuff, and they're a bit too wiggly to have their throat cut right away, they would just have a pistol handy to finish them off with. They would open the hole later on, pick the body out, rifle through the pockets, and bury it somewhere near the potatoes. And it all sounds very efficient. But a few potential victims managed to narrowly avoid this same fate, and their testimony pretty much jives exactly with the account above. A couple of people were invited to the head of the table, but they got the willies when they saw that the curtain had these big old bloodstains on them. And they got the willies and ran away. There was also a priest who saw someone lurking behind the curtain, actually holding a hammer, so he got the willies, and he ran away. And then there was this pair of travelers that decided not to eat at the head of the table. That didn't go over well, so they wanted to eat at the counter. Kate, well, you can't be eating at the counter, you assholes. Kate gets angry at them, and 2 men holding hammers get bored from hiding behind the curtain, and they come out, and these 2 travelers notice it. These 2 dudes go, boy, that's weird that these 2 guys were behind the curtain with hammers. They get the willies, and they run away. And I hope that they all forgot to pay for their meals. By the time the investigation is over, they had recovered approximately 20 bodies, and a few miscellaneous parts of a few more. The townspeople, well, they're enraged. And they track down one of the Bender's friends. Surprising they had any. And they hang him. They hang him multiple times, and they keep reviving him. And then at the end, they graciously let him stumble home alive, even though he couldn't tell them where the Benders were. And after the news of all this craziness breaks, about 1 million reporters show up at the farm, and the place gets destroyed by looters. Rewards are offered for the capture of the Bender family, and they are sort of tracked to somewhere in the vicinity of Mexico. And they call off the search when they get in the vicinity of Mexico because they're afraid of the Indians and the Mexicans, and that's pretty much the end of it. The Benders are never definitively found. Legends abound of whatever became of them, and various gangs took credit for killing them and disposing of their bodies. But the reward was never claimed because, well, I guess nobody trusts any of these gang people either. Sightings of the Benders would persist for decades after the incident, and people were actually arrested on the suspicion of being parts of the Bender family. But as far as I can tell, no one was proven to have had anything to do with it. Another family of serial killers from just south of Kansas, named the Kellys, were active in the 1880s, and depending on who you ask, they were the Benders in disguise. They had a tavern, they used to drop people into a pit through a trapdoor in the floor, and some of the victims would die from the fall. Man, that's a pretty big fucking hole. and whoever survived the fall would be later killed with an axe. The Kellys targeted wealthy victims and had to run off to Mexico as well on account of they were murderers and stuff. They were eventually caught and killed by a different, more determined, angry mob. So you can see why people would make the connection between these two merry bands of psychopaths. And in my non-expert opinion, they're not the Benders, but, well, I'm not very knowledgeable and I can't be taken very seriously. Now, when everything is shook out, everything's dug up, everything's accounted for, about 12 townspeople are charged with crimes related to the Benders, because the Benders used to deal in stolen property that they got from a bunch of dead people. Now, none of these people were ever hung or fried or, drawn and quartered or anything, but they were charged. And if you find these pricks interesting, 3 hammers and a bloody knife recovered from the farmhouse can be seen at various museums somewhere in Kansas. It's all very disturbing, yet intriguing if you're into that. Yeah, sicko. These Bender people are quite the dirty cunts, and I hope whatever happened to them was quite painful and disgusting. I hope they died slowly from the STDs they got from banging each other, and I hope all their genitalia sloughed off onto the floor in a yucky pile of genitalia guts. And that's about enough for these crazy Bender people. They're a bunch of cunts. I don't want to talk about them anymore. And there you have it. Another insulting episode of the worst true crime podcast ever. Evil Done Badly is in the books. If you would like to reach out and suggest future episode topics, we can be reached on Instagram or YouTube at Evil Done Badly, or by email at evildonebadly@gmail.com. Thanks for checking us out. I'm so glad you're here. Tell your friends so they can be annoyed by us too. My name is Dick, and I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.